stem cells should be used in medical research, and it's a question of utilitarianism approach to ethics versus universalism. Utilitarian says that if the ultimate, it doesn't necessarily matter what is done, techniques that are used, as long as the ultimate outcome is good.
Right.
Whereas universalism says, hey, using stem cells is unethical. So therefore, even though the ultimate outcome may be good, you can't do it.
Right.
Right, Rabbi?
Yeah, well, Judaism says that you can, but it's also, you can't. I mean, this is a whole other topic. I don't want to get into it.
No, I'm sorry.
No, not an expert on it. But I guess my point was that, there is the ability to harness and use and engage in stem cell research. We don't believe that life starts at conception in the same way. There's like a 40-day period, which is kind of a trigger point within Jewish belief about when that embryo takes on life. So that creates a little bit more latitude when it comes to these issues. But I remember I was saying to Susan that years ago when this was first becoming on the scene, I think at the time Rabbi Tendler or a few other Torah authorities participated in a commission that was set up by George W. Bush about what do faith have to say about this. So that was, that was what I thought was fascinating. Anyway, welcome back, everybody. So we are now in the midst of our exploration of the Kli Yakar. Does anyone remember from last week what the Kli Yakar's real name is?
Shlomo Ephraim Luncheon.
You've done your homework. That's impressive.
That is.
He wrote it down.
I take notes.
Hey, cheat. You wrote it down. That's a good.
No, that's smart.
That's smart. Not cheat. That's smart. So last week we talked a little about his background. I pointed out that I'm just going to mute everybody for a minute, but please feel free to unmute. Okay. We talked about his background and also the fact that he's not included in kind of a newer edition of the great commentators, but still, of course, is in the Mikro Kedolo. And then we shared a beautiful idea of his that talks about the element of faith when it comes to Hashem sending Yaakov down to Egypt. So today we're going to focus on two other ideas that emerge within his thinking. One is the significance of machshava, of thought versus deed when it comes to an action, and we'll see what that means. And then we'll also talk about, and he spoke a lot about the importance of not letting wealth become an end in and of itself, and the importance of generosity and of supporting each other. That was like a major theme that he spoke about. So I'm going to put a source up on the screen for you right now. Okay, and you'll see actually this is something that's kind of very germane in a moment to the parshiot that we are in the midst of. The Torah says at the very beginning of Vayikra. Now, just as a word of background, again, you can feel free to unmute, but the establishment of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, that itself was a idea that emerged prior to the sin of the golden calf or after the sin of the golden calf? Was that something that was a priori what God intended, or was it only a response to the sin of the golden calf?
Response.
Response. Okay, David Queskin, do you know which great commentator you are invoking? It's
Myself.
not Lorraine Queskin. Who is it? What?
No, I don't.
Okay. Anybody know? David's giving
It's
a good
logical.
opinion. It's what?
To me, is logical.
To you, it's logical. Why is it logical?
Because the people fail to recognize, fail to do as God had thought it would evolve, and so this was a solution that would overcome the resistance of people.
Right, and to a certain degree, it was a way to take their need to have some sort of physical connection to God and sanctify it. That's the opinion of Rashi. Rashi says that even though the mitzvah of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, in chronologically in the Torah comes before. It's the parsha of Truma and Tetzaveh, and the golden calf is in the parsha of Kitisa that we read last week. Rashi says, Ein mukdam umuchar b'Torah. That there's no necessarily chronological order in the Torah. And just because it was commanded first doesn't actually mean that's when it appeared. Really, God gave it to the Jewish people as a response to the golden calf. On the other end of the spectrum is the opinion of who?
The Ramban.
The Ramban, Nachmanides. He says that no, you don't just say that it's out of order. God said to build a Mishkan, a tabernacle, even before the sin of the golden calf. A priori, that is something that is an important foundation of Jewish life, regardless of the golden calf. And his opinion is that the reason why we have the Mishkan, it's true that God is everywhere, but as we've shared before, the Mishkan was meant to be a portable Mount Sinai experience. It was meant to be a place where even when they're out of Mount Sinai, they still need a place in which to convene and be inspired. So what we're going to do today is a little bit of unpacking a little bit and a beautiful idea of the Kli Yakar as to how the Mishkan itself was an atonement for the Egel HaZahav, which is really more of Rashi's opinion, not the Ramban's opinion. So if you look, it's on your screen, chapter 9, verse 2. In the very beginning of Vayikra, we're really getting ready for the inauguration of the Mishkan, which takes place actually in the Parsha of Shmini, but they're getting ready for all the Korbanot. And it says, Vayomer el Aaron. God says to Aaron, or he said to Aaron, Kach lecha egel ben bakar lechatat. Va'ayel lo la'tamimim v'akir lefnei Hashem. Take a calf of the herd for a chatat, a sin offering, and a ram for a burnt offering without blemish, and bring them before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, bring them before God. Now, if you look here, God is telling Aaron to bring an egel. And that's not, by the way, coincidental. Why is he telling him to bring an egel as an atonement? Because the Jewish people, of course, were involved in the sin of the Egel HaZahav, right? It says earlier on in last week's Parsha, Vayigof Hashem Am al asher asu, that God sent a plague to the Jewish people because they worshiped the Egel, the golden calf. And here's the key point, Asher Asa Aharon. God literally says that I brought a plague to the Jewish people because of the sin that Aaron did. What sin did Aaron do?
He made
I mean,
the
the
calf.
Jewish people, what was that? David, go ahead.
I said he listened to the people.
He listened to the people.
And as opposed to, what God wanted.
Yeah, as opposed to, by the way, Diane just mentioned over here, who was the one that was murdered actually because he decided to protest? Hur. Hur was the son of who? Of Miriam and Kalev. And he was murdered. And Aaron made a calculation, this is important, that he felt, and many of the commentators say that, of course, Aaron was not going to worship a golden calf, but nevertheless, he felt that he could somehow delay the worshiping of the golden calf by asking people to bring their gold and silver and participate. But at the end of the day, there is some level of accountability that Aaron has, because even though he was doing it, what's called the Shem Shemayim. What's the Shem Shemayim?
In the name of God. And
God, he wasn't worshiping them, but nevertheless, he was still a partner because the Jewish people took the gold and the silver that he requested and made the golden calf. So look at the Kli Yakar. We're going to read this. I'm going to read this in Hebrew because there's no direct translation, but then I do have a kind of a loose translation on the bottom. So here we go. You can follow along or just listen. Kach lecha egel ben bakar lechatat. So the Kli Yakar comments on this word, where God tells Aaron to take an egel. So yesh makshim. Some people ask, Lama egel shel Aaron balachatat? Why does Aaron bring an egel as a sin offering? The egel shel Yisrael, but then when it comes to the egel, the calf that was brought by the Jewish people, it was la'olah. This is later on, actually. It describes that the Jewish people brought an egel as a chatat. The Jewish people brought a calf as an olah. An olah is what kind of offering? Literally, what does the word aliyah mean? It's fully consumed on the altar, but Aaron brought his as a chatat, which was not fully consumed. V'amar b'zeh lefi. Why is this? The Kli Yakar says, shebechet ha'egel, when it comes to the sin of the golden calf, or the calf, not golden, lo chata Aaron b'machshava. Aaron did not sin b'machshava, with his thought. Shaharei, because vadai lo nitkavein, he certainly did not have intention. L'shem avodah zara klal. He had no intention to worship idols. The ikar chet'o, and his main sin, haita b'ma'aseh. It was in ma'aseh. It was in action. Sha'asa ha'egel befoal, to actually make the egel through direct action. As it says, Vayigof, this is what we quoted, that God plagued the Jewish people, al asher asura egel, that they made the egel, the Jewish people, asher asah Aaron. He's asking here, what does it add? If you look back in this verse, it says that God plagues the nation who made the calf, and then it adds almost as a postscript, asher asah Aaron, that Aaron made as well. Who made it? Did the Jewish people make it? Did Aaron make it? So the Kli Yakar says here, Matal Melomar, what is this telling you? Lo ro ba Aaron lo chata ki'im ba'asiyat ha'egel v'lo b'machshava. In other words, Aaron was involved in the action, but not in the thought. Al korachach, therefore, keravnu egel chatat hamachaper al chet hamaseh. The nature of Aaron's transgression was fundamentally different than the nature of the transgression of the Jewish people. And different offerings are intended for different kinds of transgressions. If somebody transgresses something, God forbid, that it's only an action, but really their heart is not in it, then there's one kind of offering, and that's the offering of a chatat. Aval Yisrael, the Jewish people, shachatu gam b'machshava. They also sin not only in deed, but in thought. Why? They really wanted to worship this idol. Therefore, they have to give an olah. Olah is an offering that's fully consumed, and an olah is given when somebody is not only guilty of action, but also guilty in thought as well.
Murder versus manslaughter.
Say that again, Nancy, what?
Murder versus manslaughter.
Right, so manslaughter is action but not intent, correct?
Yeah.
Just checking because I'm not a lawyer. Toby has a question. Go ahead, Toby.
So this troubles me because I feel that Aaron is getting off light. Because I'll tell you what I'm thinking, because even though his thoughts might not have been, oh, I know I don't really believe in this and I'm not really personally really straying from God, his whatever he did, his actions influenced so many other people who may have not been making that distinction. And later on in the Torah, I forget what the term is for it, for a person who, gets up and, preaches blasphemy and so on and so forth, and they're so severely punished. It seems as though that's something that is considered so serious later on in the Torah with that, with regard to other people, and yet with our own, it's not considered so bad.
Well, I think your point is definitely well taken. I don't know, and I would imagine that you're right. When people saw what he did, to a certain degree, it kind of, they may not have, and because nobody can see into his heart. So the fact that he did it, maybe potentially, I think you're right, was in some way to legitimize,
Legitimize. Yeah.
thank you, what they were doing. On the other hand, I mean, it wasn't that Aaron wasn't punished, by the way. I mean, he clearly had to bring a chatat, and he himself, this is later on, but is extremely reticent. I mean, God ultimately does forgive him because, again, as most of the commentators say, he was doing it l'shem shamayim. He wasn't trying to worship an idol. Nevertheless, God says, and I think this is probably partially why he's responsible, he did the action. Potentially, he could have influenced other people. But I think that what the point is being made here is that God is saying that machshava does count, either positive or negative.
But didn't he like ask for all of the gold from people, trying to, in a way of dissuading them, thinking that maybe they won't do it, they won't want to part with it, and he tried to elongate the process as much as he could.
Well, thanks for standing up, Nancy, in the court of law against Toby when it comes to the trial of Aaron. I think we should put you guys in a room together, and we're all going to go out of the room right now. I'll put you in a breakout.
We need a jury. We need the jury.
I'm going to put you in a breakout Zoom room so you can battle it out and you come back with a verdict. But I think it can go both ways. I mean, that's the way, Nancy, that much of the sages say that he was just using a stall tactic here, that it wasn't necessarily that he was. I mean, even Toby would say, it's not like Aaron want to worship the Egel HaZahav, but Toby's holding him a little more accountable, let's say.
I'm just saying that in light of the way blasphemers or people who influence others is treated later in the Torah, it seems inconsistent. That's really.
But we still have a what is the word, nascent population. They're not fully baked yet, so. They don't quite understand what they're doing necessarily. They're on their way.
Can I
go ahead? Sure.
I'd like to join Nancy and go against and challenge Toby.
Yeah, how
I
so?
can take it.
Okay. So, and I understand where Toby is coming from, the blasphemy of the situation, the broad influence it had. But the question is whether the person who did this blasphemy was intending to do it, which presumably he or she was, versus Aharon in this situation was not necessarily intending to worship the golden calf. He was intending to just delay it. So I guess it's the same sort of the question of manslaughter. Manslaughter, which may be unintentional, but results in a crime. The degree of punishment, I presume, Toby, depends upon what was actually done or how serious,
right,
the consequence was. Am I explaining it?
The consequences were terrible. I mean, all these people now went and worshipped a golden calf.
But I'm saying the rabbi.
Can I support Toby?
Thank you, Susan.
Oh my God.
Thank you. I was wondering where you were.
Yeah, I look at it as Toby does. I think actions say more than words, or thoughts rather. Nobody can see inside someone's head. When you have the silent majority, as they say, that says something. You have to speak up, you have to act. And if the actions brought other people to sin, which Aaron's absolutely did, I think he should have been held responsible even more so because he was a leader and his standard of conduct should have been higher. But let me ask a question, and this has always bothered me. It's relevant to a lot of other issues. Why is it that only perfect animals are slaughtered? I mean, I understand God should get the best, but on the other hand, to me, it seems to indicate that if it's not perfect and people aren't perfect, they're not as good as someone who is perfect. It always bothered me.
Uh, I see David Queskin nodding his head. Judaism is very much into valuing people not for their physical either perfection or not. I mean, or spiritual. What were you going to say, Dan? Dan was going to say. Or spiritual. I mean, there are many statements where where the Torah and Judaism indicate that God loves. I don't know what the background noise is. Sorry. What God loves and values is every human being and everything that is created in God's image. And there's, again, many proofs of that, and where the Torah talks about going out of our way to make sure that nobody feels not included. At the same time, when it comes to giving a gift to God, it's not about that God needs perfection, but it's a way to affirm in our minds the significance of that relationship. It's like, for example, I mean, if you're giving a gift to a friend, you're not going to pull an old card that's all worn and torn and just throw it together. The card still may have the words on it, but the way that you present it is a reflection in reality many times of how much care and how much we value the relationship. It's worth more on the market. It's just something that has more intrinsic value. So I think that's the point here. It's not that in the big scheme of things, from God's perspective, the person or the animal has less value, but it's really about, I'm trying to mend my relation with God, so therefore I need to demonstrate that this relationship really means a lot. So I have to take an animal that has absolutely no blemish on it, that has higher intrinsic value on the, than something else. That's just a thought.
Rabbi,
Oh, Susan.
Aaron, I'm
Susan
sorry,
had a
just to
back-
finish the question.
Yeah.
But what if the Cohen has a limp? Is he still allowed to perform?
Moses stuttered. Moses wasn't perfect.
He wasn't Aaron. I mean, he's not the
Oh,
Cohen.
so that's, by the way, no, but that relates to another idea, which I think we can talk about maybe, if you don't mind, in another time, because sort of Hirsch has a lot about that, which is something that is definitely troubling. Again, Judaism, as I said, believes very strongly in the notion of inclusivity and not evaluating somebody spiritually based on any either physical imperfection or handicap. Yet the individuals that are serving as our ambassadors in that role, in that public role, it was important that there was no distraction almost from us seeing them as kind of the role models for us. Susan, I'm gonna make a note. That's discussed in Parshat Emor, which is in a few weeks. And Rav Hirsch has a lot to speak about that. So maybe I'll send you an article about it, but I don't want to that could take another.
Okay, great, thank
20
you.
minutes. No problem. Dean, you had a question?
I was just going to add, I think that the other aspect of kashrut and this sense that the animal has to be perfect is to enable us as individuals in our eating and keeping kosher, is to achieve a higher level, to have a goal of perfection, have a goal of being closer to Hashem.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, through that ritual, that establishes, it helps to build one's midos and one's, character and
Yep.
striving to be better.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, why don't we take that for another topic?
Okay, sounds good.
Time.
So let me just know this is a great conversation, and we'll be giving the verdict on who wins next week.
I just want to give you the source for my argument.
Okay.
Rabbi chapter 13, verse 7. One who entices others to go astray, and then with the penalty of death. For the
Yeah.
person who does that.
That's true. By the way,
That's what I was referring to.
Rabbi, do you grade like I do in my class for classroom participation?
as a matter of fact, you win by effort, not necessarily by who has the best argument. So I'm waiting for Nancy to bring a verse to support her claim, and then we'll be in good shape.
I think Toby will win on that score.
Oh boy. Okay. So I want to just kind of bring this piece to a conclusion, this piece of the Yakar, and I'll just read what I wrote. I didn't write it, but there's a fundamental difference in our own sin in contrast to the nation's sin. he suggested Aaron's sin was one of action. And here's a Hebrew word that's worthy of note, kum va'aseh. Kum va'aseh means they did something, he did something with he got up and he did, rather than one of machshava. This is the case since Aaron certainly had absolutely no intention of idol worship. According to the Yakar, Aaron's violation was the sin of commission, of action, rather than one of thought. His mind remained pure from any thought or intention of idol worship. Yet, although his actions lack a thought component, Aaron's feelings of guilt were appropriate and representative of the gulf between God and himself that he had caused. Therefore, he declared to Moshe, I know that the Holy One, blessed is he, is angry with me. And this is what I was going to allude to before, that Aaron definitely felt that when it was coming to the inauguration of the Mishkan, that he was unworthy because of the fact that at the end of the day, even though his thought was pure, he was, like Toby was saying, an accomplice to one of the gravest and tragic events in Jewish history. I know the Holy One, blessed be he, is angry with me because of my role in the sin of the golden calf. And on my account, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, has not descended for Israel. In order to remove the yawning chasm that separated God from Aaron, and by extension, God from the Jewish people, Moses entered the tent of meeting with him and prayed for mercy. This is actually in the very beginning of Vayikra. Then the Shekhinah came down for Israel. It's actually the end of Shemot. Moses and Aaron prayed together to end the separation that had prevented the divine presence from dwelling among the Jewish people. By joining forces in prayer, they were able to close the gap that had separated Klal Yisrael from their creator. And here there's a beautiful midrash that alludes to this a little bit. Hold on one second. Hold on 1 minute. Where the midrash, and this, by the way, when I quote the midrash here, this is again written a little under 2,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago, and states what we've just talked about very clearly. It says that when Moshe, b'sha'ah sheyared Moshe miSinai, when Moshe came down from Har Sinai and he saw this event, right? He saw Aaron, and the Midrash says, Lo nitkavein, that Aaron's intent was only la'akvam, to hold them back until Moshe came down. Moshe originally thought that maybe Aaron was complicit. And then God himself, and this, by the way, is a beautiful point. Moshe himself was thinking what a lot of us are thinking. Aaron, how could you do this? Moshe doesn't see Aaron's negotiations. Moshe sees his brother with the people that are worshiping the golden calf. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God says, Moshe, Yodea ani kavanato shel Aaron. God himself, who's the only one who knows the hearts of mankind, says, I know the intention of Aaron. Heich haita latova, how it was for the good. And then he explains in the rest of the Midrash that, again, it's important for Moshe to know, again, who was personally devastated by this, to see his brother involved, that Aaron's intent was nowhere near, no intent of idolatry. It was just really to stall them. Okay, so that's a beautiful point of the Kli Yakar. There's one point that I just want to make here that relates to the. I'm just going to put this up on your screen. Hold on. Love when you guys get to see all my emails. Hold on. Wait a minute. It was here. Sorry. You know, we've been talking right now about the. I don't know where it went, but we've been talking about the value of. What? Okay, hold on. Sorry. We've been talking about the value, and I'll just say it out loud for a minute, of thought versus deed. And the Kli Yakar is reminding us that God looks at them independently. There's a beautiful point that's made in the Chumash regarding thought in this week's Parsha that I just want to share with you, which is in the Parsha of Yakar. I'll just show this to you for a moment. So in the Parsha of Yakar, we read about, of course, the people making contributions to the Mishkan. And if you look in chapter 35, verse 20, for those that have a Chumash, I'll just put it up on the screen right now. Hold on, here we go. Chapter 35, verse 20. It's right here. Everyone sees. Okay. So after the mandate was given, and it was really the first pitch of the capital campaign. This is important. This was the first capital campaign in Jewish history. Moshe gives the pitch, and then it says, "Vayetzu kol adat b'nei Yisrael lifnei Moshe." The whole community of Israelites left Moshe. And then, and this is really a miracle, what I'm about to read to you. Vayavo kol ish asher nesa'o libo v'choshen anavo rucho, that everyone whose heart moved him, and nidava rucho, same idea, spirit was generous. Heviu et trumat Hashem, they brought a teruma, they brought a gift to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to God. The Chidah, who's one of the commentaries, says that this was extraordinary. Because most times when people have nisa'o libo, they have a thought to do something good, it doesn't always get translated into action. We all have moments where we have a fluttering of the spirit and we have good thoughts and we want to do something, whether it is a mitzvah of tzedakah or calling somebody, whatever it is. But here, the miracle that took place was that all of the thoughts that people had, they all moved into Trumat Hashem, they all moved into action. And that was really one of the greatest events that happened here. And I share this with you because, again, God says, machshavot, thoughts are important. And God gives Aaron credit, not only for what he punishes what he does, but he says, I value your machshava, your thought. But here in this week's Parsha, God is saying that your machshava tova, when you have a good thought, obviously there's another principle that says that God says, if you have a good thought and you wanted to do something, and there was something out of our control that didn't enable us to do it. Let's say a person wants to, I don't know, again, do a mitzvah, volunteer, and they really wanted to do it. And there was something that was totally out of their control. God says, I give you credit for that because you really wanted to do it. But here it's saying that many times we have thoughts, but we don't actually turn them into action. This is actually one of these great moments in history when all those nisa'o libo who wanted to do the right thing, it was actually transformed into action. So I share that kind of as a point. Marina looks like she has something to say as I go to my final source. Marina, go ahead.
No, it is about what we have in mind. The importance of it we see when we are talking about what happened in during the, for example, in Sahim, if Cohen, who made who performed the sacrifice, has some different thoughts that okay, he's supposed to make it Allah, but in his mind he thought about some different shlamim or whatever. It doesn't consider the right sacrifice. And the same if somebody when we are talking about Pesach sacrifice, and Cohen keeps in mind to keep this meat to eat in a proper time. So it is absolutely this sacrifice kind of doesn't count.
Right. That's a great example. That's right. What we're learning in the Tractate of Pesachim, that right, even the wrong thoughts can actually invalidate. If a korban is meant to be one thing, but the Cohen has in mind something else, it then becomes problematic. So I think this overall idea, just to summarize this point, is that the Kli Yakar is focusing on God's important value for all of us. That yes, ma'asim are important, but God also values the machshavot, the thoughts that we have, and intent is important. Again, God does say too that even if somebody doesn't want to do a mitzvah, so many people will say, well, if I don't feel like doing it, should I do it anyway? Judaism does have another principle which says, mitoch shelo lishma, that even if we do a mitzvah for the wrong reasons, we're not doing it because we really want to do it. God says do it anyway, because hopefully by doing it anyway, the actions will affect our emotions as well. I just want to conclude in the last 5 minutes by giving one other Kli Yakar insight that related to last week's Torah portion, and another, I think, important value of the Kli Yakar, which is the mitzvah of the chatzi shekel, the half shekel. And the Torah says something very interesting regarding the half shekel. It says, again, the English doesn't do justice, but it says, when you raise up the Jewish people according to their accounting, they give something which is a kofer nafsho, literally an atonement for the soul. So the Kli Yakar is struggling, as many commentators do, that what does this mean that the money that you give is an atonement for the soul? So the Kli Yakar makes a beautiful point here. It's right in front of you. The Kli Yakar writes, he says that this idea of why we give a half a shekel, and he's like very open about it. He says, Nimtsa'u b'midrashim kama drachim shonot. This is also his approach. He says, you know what? There are a lot of opinions here. You find in the Midrash many different paths. And I think that speaks, by the way, to Kli Yakar's humility. He's not saying this is the only way. He says, I'm going to give you my opinion, but there are a lot of other opinions here. He says, but I want to add on 3 different reasons. And one of the things that he says is, his second reason, Lefi shezeh kofer nefesh. What does that mean? It's an accounting or atonement for the soul. V'yadua shemitzad nefesh, when it comes to the soul of a person, ein yitron l'shum adam al chavero. Nobody has anything up on anybody else. Everybody's soul is unique and beloved in God's eyes. Ki nefesh hachiyuni shaveh b'kulam. Everybody has the same life force as everybody else. And therefore, whether somebody is rich or somebody is rash, is poor, they are equal in this. Shekol adam hu shekel shalem v'chol matchsit nichlav mispar yud. He explains here, he says, everybody, what's the reason why in this idea that when it comes to the contribution of the chatzi shekel, everybody gives exactly the same? What does it mean it's atonement for the soul? It's a reminder that intrinsically we all have the same value. Regardless of our economic resources or ability, the Kli Yakar is pointing out this important affirmation that we shouldn't judge a person by their wealth or their accoutrements or economic status, but we should see it for the kind of intrinsic, he writes beautifully, Ein yitron l'shum aldam al chavero. Nobody has anything up on anybody else. Ki nefesh hachiyuni, the life force that God puts in everybody is the same. And it's important for us to see individuals that way. Then he quotes, by the way, a Kabbalistic idea as to why it's a chatzi shekel versus a half shekel. And he talks about, if you look in the text, it says that how much was the chatzi shekel? Esrim Geirah. So he goes into a Kabbalistic understanding of what is significant about the number 20. It says 20 Geirah to a shekel, and half a shekel is 10. So he says something beautifully here that, in quoting a Gemara in Nida, there are 3 partners in a human being, 10 things that come from the father. I don't know this Gemara well. 10 things that come from the mother, and together with God, it creates a human. So he goes Kabbalistically into the value of the number 10. But again, his overarching principle, just to summarize, and this will be a good segue for next week, is number 1, the intrinsic value of every human being. And number 2, he's also reminding people that people should not be valued by their wealth, but by who they are. And that will lead us to a big idea of the Kli Yakar, which is his approach to wealth. He was very against people being ostentatious with wealth. He really encouraged people that have wealth to make sure that they feel a sense of social responsibility to people around them. And we're going to talk about some of those ideas next week. He lived in an area called the Four Lands. This is something and we'll talk about this. He gave many sermons. There was something called the Council of the Four Lands, which is a central body of Jewish authority from different areas in Poland. And he was an outspoken proponent of people that were not in good economic situations. And he would talk very passionately about trying to create a safety net and increase charity in his community. So we'll talk about that more next week. We will pause here for station identification. You're now on the CAS Zoom website, and the votes will come in. Please send me the votes. Is Toby the winner, or is Nancy the winner? Just
Obviously a
kidding.
draw.
It's a draw.
Right, broad,
Spoken-
definitely.
Spoken like a true diplomat, David. Okay, I'm going to pick up with the next class in 5 minutes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome.